You could be the ghost of Christmas future if next year goes your way. Vince Maple, leader of the Labour group down here in Medway. Before we get into the future, let's just look back at the year that was. What kind of year do you think Medway's had?
Well, I think it's been a really interesting year, a challenging year at points because of the challenges we've all had across the country. We took that time in September to recognise the tragic passing of the late Queen Elizabeth. I think, the community really came together for that. It was a pretty spectacular moment in all of our lives that we will remember once in a lifetime situation. But we've seen, families here in Medway and across the country struggling with the cost of living. That's happening in a real and genuine way. But nevertheless, people are still trying to do their really fantastic best in certain circumstances we find across the community. Places like the food banks where people are volunteering, really making a difference. So, look, I wish those things didn't exist. I wish food banks didn't exist. But while they're there, we've got brilliant people volunteering and making a difference. And that, for me, kind of sums up the Medway kind of grit and determination.
Let's just go through chapter by chapter that City of Culture status. How disappointed were you that Medway didn't get that? And did you expect them to ever win?
Look, we lost out on two bids this year, City of Culture and City Status. City of Culture was always going to be really challenging. It's a really coveted prize. I think it was right that Medway was in the mix. I think we had a good story to tell. I think one of the things that actually helped with the bid was the council was in the background. It was the community leading the bid. And look, I really wish Bradford all the very best. They're going to be fantastic. But we put forward a good bid. City Status, a different thing. Of course, we've now lost that 4 times. I think it was always going to be slightly challenging after the very tragic death of Sir David Amos. And of course, Southend being less than 20 miles across the estuary. So that was always going to be a challenge. So I do think we need to look now whether city status is right for us. And I've said this elsewhere. I think we need to ask the question, do the decision makers of this, obviously technically the decision maker is the king now, but do the decision makers get the concept of Medway? Is it something they think can be a city? Because if the answer to that is no, then I do think we need to think again about putting a bid in. But if the answer is they're open to that, then I think we should look really hard at how have other places been successful, and we need to do some of that.
You spoke there about the king, and let's just briefly look at the chapter before, Queen Elizabeth. How did you hear the news, and where were you? What happened in your life when you heard the news?
So I was away in Butlins, of all places. It was the week before my son Ned started school. So we were taking that opportunity to have a few days away. And obviously, as most people during that particular Thursday, we started to hear, obviously, news that the Queen was unwell, and that was very, very difficult. And then just a couple of hours before the tragic news, actually, we had news from our house sitter that my son's goldfish had died. So in the space of a couple of hours, he dealt with 2 bereavements of both his goldfish and, of course, Her Majesty the Queen. So that will always be a poignant memory for me. But when, obviously, we heard the tragic news and we saw, both here in Medway and across the country, that huge outpouring, the vast majority of listeners of Radio Kent will have only ever known the Queen as our head of state. And I think we are in a time of massive change, not necessarily just because of that. Of course, we've gone through more prime ministers and most people have had hot dinners this year. But I think that constant of the Queen Elizabeth being head of state for us, and in that powerful position, but also position which was respected across the world, I think leaves us in a situation where I think some people are probably questioning whether the monarchy should exist. I think we've heard that from people like Jacinta Ardern over in New Zealand. And of course, every country who has the Queen previously and now the King of Head of State will be having that conversation, because I think for most people, for those 70 years, that wasn't a conversation that happened. So I think we'll probably see in some countries around the world those conversations just being posed perhaps for the first time.
You mentioned prime ministers there, and you are on the Labour side of the benches. That's where your colours are laid bare. Are Labour a better party than they were 5 years ago? Are they a party ready for real leadership and actually taking over the reins of running a country? Or are they simply a party that people are voting for because they're so fed up with where the Conservatives have been this year?
I think the answer to that is all of the above. I think I was really lucky enough to be in Liverpool for our party conference. And I've been to most of those over the last 20 years. And actually, from my perspective, I don't think I've walked away from a conference feeling quite so positive and quite so focused on the fact that we've got a government in waiting more than ever. That's not to say that Jeremy Corbyn and Ed Miliband didn't have good ideas as leaders, didn't encourage and inspire people to be active, but actually it's about being a government in waiting. And I think actually with Cllr, we've got someone who is ready for that.
What was you most proud of this year, being Vince Maple? Away from politics, maybe in politics. What was your moment where you think, "Do you know what, this year, I'm so pleased I did X"?
Well, I'm in a really lucky position to be able to focus all the time on my community. So whether it's volunteering at the local vaccination centre here in Chatham at the Pentagon Centre, that was a real privilege to be part of that process, ensuring people were less likely to die of COVID.
What did it teach you? What did it teach you being in there?
It taught me actually, at a time when there is a real big difficulty, which of course COVID was and continues to be, that actually people working together, coming from all different backgrounds, all different parts of society, and just saying, right, we're going to get on and make this happen, supported of course by our NHS, because it's the NHS that drove that forward. Anything's possible. Anything's possible. So there are now people who almost certainly wouldn't have been vaccinated if it wasn't for the fact of that being here in the heart of their community. So that was a phenomenal thing. And it was a privilege to give a bit of my time, and I know other colleagues did as well. From a personal perspective, seeing Ned go to school. So Ned's just started at school in September, and that was just a wonderful thing. And even in his first 2 terms, he's had the privilege of wearing the golden tie for a week because he was doing well at phonics. So that makes me very proud as a dad. And on my Twitter feed, whenever people look at that, I have all these hats that I wear, but the first hat on there always is Ned's dad. That is the most important job I have.
More to come from that conversation at Cafe Nucleus in Chatham between the opposition Labour leader in Medway, Vince Maple, and our political reporter, Michael Keown.
Lots of listeners will know in a previous life I was a senior negotiator for the GMB union, so I've sat on all different sides of the table. I think the one person who's currently on strike and needs to get back to work is Rishi Sunak, because actually he's got the ability to open the doors to have the conversations. General secretaries don't want to see their members on strike. Members don't want to be on strike. But when you're left with no other option, when the people around the negotiating table either are not there or not in a position to be able to have a conversation about the thing you want to negotiate, then it can't happen, and then you're left with no other options.
Let's start dipping into that crystal ball, looking for what could be in 2023, and it's a big year for you. You could become the leader of Medway Council. How does that feel?
Well, that's a pretty phenomenal sentence, and it's always, I think of myself as some bloke from Luton Road. I was brought up on Luton Road, went to school there, Luton Junior School. To think that I might have the privilege to be given that permission by the people of Medway to look after their vital public services is a real privilege and honour. And it's one we've got to earn. People will not just vote Labour because they're fed up with the current administration. Some might, and that's great. But actually, we've got to convince people we are the party ready for government locally. And I think the story we've got to tell around our experience, our dedication, our determination, our values, our ideas, those are all the things which, we've already been talking to thousands of people on the doorsteps. We're hearing people saying, actually, they're going to support us, some for the first time, some people asking to join the party. So we've clearly got a good story to tell, but actually there's a lot more work to do. And as I say, if we are given that privilege, the harder work will start on May the 5th.
Are you confident you could win it? It's not happened in, I think, 20-something years since there was a Labour council down here. It's been quite some time. Are you confident that this will be the year?
I think there's a number of factors that gives me more confidence than ever before.
But are you confident?
I am confident, and let me tell you some of the reasons why. We have some boundary changes, and it would be naive to say that they are not helpful for us as a party. That's dealt with independently. That's not us or the Conservatives. We'll put forward views, but an independent body will come up with those decisions. They've made those decisions. They are helpful. But actually, more than that, they bring together communities that haven't been brought together in the past, and I think that's a good thing. We've got an incredibly unpopular national government, and however much I might dislike it, lots of people will use the May 4th local elections as a mandate actually on Rishi Sunak or indeed Keir Starmer. However much, and I think if you talk to any local government politician from any political party, they'll have a level of frustration that we may have the best ideas, the best manifesto, the best pledges, but actually people are voting on what they think about the people up at Westminster. And I think I accept that's part of the conversation. And when we are between 15 and 20 points ahead in the polls, that will have an impact, and a positive impact for us locally. And we've got brilliant candidates. We've got, I think, the most diverse team we've ever had. We've got real people who have lived real experiences, who will bring those experiences to the council chamber, and I think make for a better cabinet and a better council chamber overall.
With that in mind, if you were to become the council leader down here in Medway, would you stand in any general election in 2024, or is the job of council leader enough for you?
Look, Michael, I haven't said this anywhere else, so I'm happy to share with you that, look, if we're given that privilege, that's my job. That's what I'm getting on with between then and 2027, and hopefully beyond. So I wouldn't put myself forward for any parliamentary seat if we were to win on May the 4th.
If at your next attempt you weren't successful, what would you do? Would you still pursue a career in politics? Do you then say, hold on a minute, I've had a few cracks at the whip here? Do you double down and then run the election in 2024? If you don't win in May, it's a big moment for you. Where do you go?
I'm not thinking about that. I'm thinking about being the next leader of Labour-controlled Medway Council with a brilliant team alongside me, delivering for the public of Medway. If the public of Medway decide otherwise, then I've got a bit of time to think about that answer. But at the moment, that's not a question I'm asking myself.
And as we continue to look into 2023, it's been revealed that Prince Charles wants a full-scale coronation. He wants the full pomp and ceremony. Do you think that's a good move?
Look, I think when this was first talked about, and actually the reverse was said, I think in the current climate, when people are struggling, when people are having to use food banks more than ever before, a scaled-down coronation felt right. So, somewhere in the system, that's now changed. I don't understand why that's changed, and I perhaps would urge the relevant people to just think again about how that may look in the current climate when people are struggling to pay their gas and electric bills.
Just a couple of quick fires. I like people to get to know who is representing them, who could be leading them. Favourite Christmas song?
Oh, it's The Darkness. Don't Let the Bells End, definitely.
In terms of 2022, what was the one moment where you think, Joe, what, that defined the year for me?
Well, we've talked about the Queen, sadly, but other than that, I was really lucky enough to be at the Euros final and to see the Lionesses lift that cup. That was pretty phenomenal. I was really, really privileged to be there. I bought a ticket long before we even knew who was going to be in the final. So for me, as a kind of iconic moment, that was pretty special. And I hope we get to see that again, although obviously we didn't see that with the Lions over in Qatar.
What do you ask for Father Christmas for Christmas? What does a man like you ask for?
An extra hour in bed. That would be quite pleasant. And look, I want the people of Medway to do well. I want them to succeed. And if Santa can help with that, maybe he can knock on a few doors for me. He does wear red, so that's always helpful. That would be good. But genuinely, look, I want people across the county to have a good Christmas, good New Year, and I want us to have a Labour administration in 2023.
Almost neatly there, you could be a pro at this, led me towards your Christmas message for firstly the people in Medway, but also the wider Kent region. What is your Christmas going into the New Year message for them?
Look, it's been a really challenging year. We know that, and I want to pay tribute to everyone across both Medway and the wider county of Kent, those volunteers who make a difference in our community day in, day out, those frontline key workers who deserve, frankly, far more than just applause on a Thursday night. We value you, we appreciate you, and I hope the government does more to make sure that they get what they deserve.
From all of us at Radio Kent, thank you for being with us throughout the year, and we really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. Thanks to the listeners for tuning in. I love BBC Local Radio. I'm proud that my last interview of 2022 is on my favourite local radio station. Don't tell the other BBCs that.
We didn't pay him for that either. Leader of the Medway Group,